It's the end of June, so that means we're halfway through 2018, and I still haven't really reviewed a movie on this channel yet, so I thought it'd be a fun idea to do a little mid-2018 movie review roundup. Before I begin, I just wanted to mention that recently I got in kind of a heated debate with a friend on Facebook recently about what makes a movie good. And I think it's really important for a critic to sort of define what they consider a good movie, because everybody has different values as to what makes a movie good. For instance, you might think a movie is good just because it makes you feel a certain emotion, or because it made a lot of money, or whatever factors that you have. For me, a movie is considered really great when it uses the language of cinema and uses light and sound to tell an effective story in an interesting and unique way. There are some movies that I think are bad that I really enjoy, and there are some movies I think are great, but I really don't enjoy. So being able to distinguish those two things is what I think makes a good critic. Not that I'm calling myself one of the greats or whatever, but I think that's something that's really important. Obviously, all my opinions here are subjective and my own, but hopefully there's a number of people out there who like my personality and my opinions and can use my reviews to sort of help them decide if they want to see a movie, or even just validate their own opinions, or just have a fun debate, because I love movies, and the only thing I love more than watching them is talking about them. So I'd like to do that here today. I'll try hard not to spoil any of these, but I can't make any guarantees, so just be warned there. I'm going to talk about all of the new 2018 films I saw, whether it be in theaters or on demand. I'll also try to keep these pretty short. I'd like to go more in depth, but that video would just be too long. I don't really like the idea of ratings for reviewing films, because then people just refer to your rating, your number, or your letter grade that you gave it instead of the things that you actually said about it. But people like to hear the grades, so I'll give scores out of 10 for all these movies, but they're going to be off the top of my head. They're not going to be real concrete, so I'm not going to really stand by them, but they'll be there. Right off the bat is my favorite movie of 2018, Paddington II. Part of the reason why I started this channel is because I had a lot of ideas for video essays, and the one that I mostly wanted to do was a video on Paddington. So I already have that one done, and that's on my channel now, so you know how much I love Paddington. And Paddington 2 is just as good as Paddington 1, if not better. This movie is extremely whimsical and magical, and it doesn't dumb anything down for kids. It doesn't pander. It treats kids with respect, and it's also a good movie for adults as well. There's nothing cynical about it. It doesn't end at a dumb dance sequence like so many kids' movies do today. There's nothing that's cute for the sake of being cute. It's all character-driven. Everything has a setup and a payoff. It's a beautiful screenplay. It's all about how being a good person can positively influence the people and cultures around you, which I think is a great message that really needs to be talked about today. The cinematography is beautiful. There's a lot of homages to Wes Anderson and Amelie, and it's just gorgeous. There's some set pieces in here that you'll never forget because they're so unique and original, and Hugh Grant gives possibly the best performance of his lifetime as this washed up actor who used to be great but now just does dog food commercials. It's just wonderful. It's such a shame that Paddington 1 and Paddington 2 came out at the times they did, like late December, early January. It's like the worst time to release a movie for Oscars consideration, because by the time it rolls around, people forget about the movie, and I think that's really a big reason why Paddington 1 didn't get any Oscar buzz, is because of this. I really think this has potential to be the best movie of the year, best cinematography. There's so much to love about this movie. Go out and see it if you can. It's a great, wholesome movie. And if you know me, that's sort of rare to see, because I usually like really dark stuff that has a lot of dark imagery and, kind of messed up. But this is what kids' movies should be. It's absolute perfection, 100% Rotten Tomatoes. Whatever you think of Rotten Tomatoes, 100% is really something to admire. and I don't think it's going to go down. Paddington 2 is a great example of a 10 out of 10 movie for me. I cannot think of anything wrong with this film. It's beautiful and perfect, and I love it. Next is A Futile and Stupid Gesture, which was a Netflix movie made about the guy behind National Lampoon, Animal House, all those movies from the 80s that we love. His name was Doug Kenny. He's played pretty well by Will Forte, although this is sort of a weird biopic because it goes out of its way to say that these actors don't represent these characters very well physically, or they don't really act like them very well. It's very upfront about that, and it says, it's okay, this is the general story. And Doug Kenny himself narrates it on screen, and he's like, oh, this didn't really happen this way. We just did this because it's more entertaining. So it very much is of the style of the National Lampoon movies. And if you've seen this movie, you're probably cringing your teeth at something I said earlier, but I'm not going to give it away because this movie has a really surprising twist. And I really did not see it coming, and I really admire it for it. And it stands out as a biopic in that way. More than any other biopic I've ever seen, the less you know about the person it's about, the better. And I can't really say why unless you've seen it. But if you know nothing about Doug Kenny, you're going to find something in this movie really, really special and unique. And if you do know a lot about Doug Kenny, it'll still be an interesting and fun movie. But there's a special something in there that you're going to miss if you know a lot about him. So if you're interested in the life of the person behind National Lampoon, go check it out. It's fun. It's not really anything special visually. It's kind of bland in that way, but the hook of the biopic, the tone of it, the fourth wall breaking is something really unique and worth checking out. I'd give this movie a 6 out of 10. Like I said, it doesn't really do anything too visually unique, and it's kind of a standard biopic, but it does have sort of a hook and a twist that makes it fun and unique, and the story is actually pretty interesting, so 6 out of 10. Next is Black Panther, a huge Marvel movie, major success, and its cultural influences will go down in the history books, obviously. But how is the movie? I thought it was pretty good. I had a lot of fun. I don't think it's like the masterpiece that everybody says it is. There are people on the far right and the far left that are blowing this movie completely out of proportion. And I'm just trying to look at this as a movie. I'm not trying to look at this as a political mouthpiece or anything like that. I'm just looking at it as a movie. And as a movie, it's a fairly standard Marvel movie. But the villain was great. Killmonger is a great villain because his motivations are sympathetic and relatable and kind of right. But obviously he goes about things the wrong way, and Black Panther tries to fix it. The third act kind of falls apart for me personally because I'm so tired of superhero movies where the superhero ends up fighting basically a clone of himself. It's just not interesting, especially when they both have these power suits that are indestructible. It's just boring to me. It's boring to watch. Like when he drinks the super potion, the flower or whatever, I think it would have been much better if they didn't have him do that so that he is weaker than the villain during the final fight. So there's a little bit more tension there. I think that would have been really useful. But I think this is an important movie, obviously. But it really wasn't too unique from a filmmaking viewpoint, I think. Although the music was great. The music was pretty great. The soundtrack is fun. The villain's great. It's pretty to look at too. I mean, but some of the special effects don't really work. the rhinos looked pretty bad. But yeah, Black Panther was fun. I'll give this one a 6 out of 10. Better than your average Marvel movie, but again, it's sort of following the same formula that so many Marvel movies have in the past. Annihilation. This movie, I think, should have been talked about as the groundbreaking all-female cast-led movie and not the Ghostbusters remake, because this is actually a really good, solid movie, and it doesn't rub it in your face that it stars women. It's just a movie that happens to star, I think, 5 women. But Annihilation is a really great, hard sci-fi movie. It didn't do so well because a lot of people were going into it thinking it was like a horror movie or like a horror action drama or something, but it's really not. It's a hard sci-fi movie for people who like movies like 2001: A Space Odyssey or Arrival, you know, that kind of stuff. It gets real weird and I love it. It's sort of all about refraction, genetic mutation, and that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of imagery in here that is reminiscent of The Thing. And there's some stuff in here that will not haunt you, but it'll stay in your head for a long time. And it's something I really want to revisit. And I had a lot of fun with it, but it does have a few issues. The cinematography, I think, is technically really great because they're inside of this thing called the Shimmer, which sort of looks like a soap bubble. And it makes the world look really unique, but it's also kind of ugly. That kind of turned me off a little bit. I think the story is really strong, but the script really needs some work. There are some lines in here that are just so like cringeworthy and bad. I can't really think of them off the top of my head, but there are some lines in here that just feel like a first draft. But if you like hard sci-fi, Annihilation is something really great. I know it's not the same thing as the book. Again, the movie's about refraction and mutation and evolution, so I think it makes sense thematically that the movie sort of is a refraction, a mutation of the original book. I think I read an interview with a director, who, by the way, made Ex Machina, intentionally only read the book once and wanted the movie to be sort of an impression of the book, which I think is a really unique approach, and I think it worked for the most part. I'd give Annihilation a 8 out of 10. I really enjoyed this. Game night. To be honest, I really wasn't looking too forward to this movie because so many studio comedies are so bland and boring and poorly shot and poorly acted and poorly edited and rely too much on improvisation that it just ends up bland and boring and unmemorable. And there's like a lot of pratfalls and stuff that are all CGI. They're usually so bad these days, and it makes me so angry because comedies can be so much more. And Game Night does a lot better for the studio comedy. It's shot really, really well. There's a lot of shadows. It doesn't rely on CGI. It seems like they stuck pretty much to the script, which I think is good in most comedies. And it takes a lot of twists and turns if you know anything about the movie. A lot of them are predictable, but there's a couple that had me guessing because there's sort of a metagame in the movie where you're trying to guess what's real and what isn't. And the more you know about the cliches of these kinds of movies, the more fun that becomes because it's sort of the movie sort of knows that you know these things and plays off of that, which is really fun. There's a lot of use of tilt shift lenses, which make everything look small, like a little model, which is really fitting for the game night motif throughout the movie. So it makes a lot of steps forward in that respect, but I really don't remember laughing a whole lot. I don't remember a lot of really specific jokes. And I've personally always found Jason Bateman really uninteresting as an actor, at least in film. I've only really enjoyed him in Arrested Development because he's cast so perfectly in that role. But in this movie, he's supposed to be like a fun and rambunctious game enthusiast who's married to Rachel McAdams, and I just didn't buy it for some reason. I don't know. That's just a personal gripe. But again, I don't remember laughing a whole lot here. But it is hard to get me to laugh in the theater. But it definitely is an upgrade from most studio comedies, and I applaud it for that. And I highly recommend this to people who like studio comedies because this is going to give them a little something extra that they don't usually get. So I give this one a 6 out of 10, which is pretty high for studio comedies, and in my book. Next is Red Sparrow. Again, I was not looking forward to this one, and I still remain disappointed by it. It is a very by-the-numbers spy thriller. When I saw the trailer, it just seemed like a vanity piece for Jennifer Lawrence to expose herself in more ways than one on film instead of like leaked nudes or something. It seemed there was something weird about it. What I did really enjoy about it though is her character goes to this really messed up like spy school that's all about sex. They use sex as a weapon, and it's really dark and disturbing, and I kind of love that. I kind of wish the whole movie was at this school because there was so much unique stuff happening there. And once the movie goes away from that school, it becomes your generic, bland spy thriller where all the spies know that everybody's backstabbing each other. and there's supposed to be this big twist of you're trying to figure out who the mole is, and there's like one big name actor that has like 2 lines in the first 2/3 of the movie, and I'm like, ooh, I wonder who the mole is. It was so stupid, and just boring and unmemorable. I do not recommend this one at all, even for people who really like spy thrillers. It's just bland and generic and ugly too. This movie's really ugly. It's just not fun to look at. I will say though that it has a fun use of, I don't even know what it's called. It's like a skin grafter or something. Anyways, it's a really unique torture device that I haven't seen in a movie, and I was excited to see that just because it was something I haven't seen before, which is what I'm always looking for in movies. Unfortunately, the rest of the movie isn't something I haven't seen before, and this one goes in the trash bin for me. I'd give this one a, I don't know, 4 out of 10. This one's really bad. Just barely watchable. And then I went to go see A Wrinkle in Time. I was only slightly interested to see this because it looked like it had some unique visuals. If it wasn't for MoviePass, I probably wouldn't have gone to see this, just because it didn't seem very interesting to me. But boy, was this movie bad. I mean, not just bad. This was literally one of the worst films I've ever seen in a theater. I try as hard as I can not to walk out of a movie. I haven't yet, but this is probably the closest I've ever gone. This movie is so dumb and so lazy and so poorly shot and poorly acted and horribly written. I cannot imagine any adult who has any sort of intelligence finding any joy out of this movie at all. It's so bad. This is the kind of movie I can see little kids enjoying and then regretting enjoying it later in life. This, from what I understand, the book A Wrinkle in Time is supposed to introduce little kids to big philosophical ideas and complex thought. And that's interesting, but the movie doesn't do that at all. It's very surface level. This movie's about as deep as a fortune cookie, okay? And the acting is absolutely atrocious, especially from this little boy, and it is hard to watch. It's so bad. And also, a lot of people have been praising the director Ava DuVernay, or however you pronounce her name, because she's one of the more prominent black female directors out there, which is great. But this movie is just awful, and it's directed so poorly. And the shot composition is some of the worst I've ever seen. And like, there's this part where a character turns into this weird flying leaf thing that serves no purpose at all. This movie is just pointless. If I could wrap this movie up in one word, it would be pointless. I wasted an hour and a half of my time that I'll never get back, and I'm embarrassed for having watched it. But it makes me appreciate the movies I like so much more that are that are what this movie is trying to be, like Never Ending Story or Labyrinth or something like that. Avoid A Wrinkle in Time at all costs. It's not even fun to make fun of. It's so bad. If you have a kid who really liked A Wrinkle in Time, I guarantee they're going to regret it in the future, probably. I seriously can't imagine anybody with half a brain finding this unique or interesting or thought-provoking or anything. It's just nothing. This movie is so stupid. I give this a 1 out of 10. It's really awful. And then there's Tomb Raider, which is a great example of a movie that's just as good as it is bad. It's just sort of bland and by the numbers, but it's also kind of fun. Definitely better than any of the other Tomb Raider movies that have come out. And I think this goes up as one of the best video game movies, because there's really not any other good ones, unless you count Wreck-It Ralph, which isn't really a video game movie, because it's not. I'm talking about a movie based on a video game first. And I think the first 2/3 of Tomb Raider are pretty fun. There's some unique visuals. The character of Lara Croft is pretty fun. Her relationship with her father is unique and interesting. But I think where this movie falls is the actual Tomb Raider aspect of it. There's a lot of puzzle solving in the movie, but it's never explained what she's doing. It's like she magically knows how to solve these puzzles, and you don't really know the process going through in her head, which sort of takes out the fun of those scenes, because it looks like she's just like a magic puzzle master or whatever. So watching her solve these puzzles isn't interesting, and it could have been. And then in the last third, when they're actually going through the tomb, It's like the most generic like puzzle like tomb traps you've seen in like Indiana Jones and anything. It's nothing you really haven't seen before. But the movie does have this interesting twist because you're trying to figure out if there is a supernatural element or not. And then there's a really dumb joke at the end that teases a sequel. I'm not really looking forward to seeing a sequel, but I don't know. It'd probably be kind of fun. There were some good action set pieces in here, and Alicia Vikander does a good job as Lara Croft. She's fun to watch. This is a good movie to put on in the background, just because it's got some fun moments, but it's kind of forgettable. I'll give this one a 5 out of 10. Just middle of the road, not really offensive, doesn't really try anything risky. It's shot decently, but pretty generic. Then there's Love, Simon. Again, another kind of generic like teen drama about a boy that is coming out to be gay to his friends, and he's trying to figure out who this mystery other gay person that he's chatting with online. And it's sort of like a mystery comedy genre kind of thing, and it's cute and fun. And this movie is pretty great for teenagers. It doesn't really offer anything of substance for adults, really, I don't think, but it's a good introduction to sort of that coming out world, I think, for teenagers. So I think it can be really useful, and I can imagine this movie being a favorite of a lot of teenagers, especially those that are in the closet, because this movie treats gay people with a lot of respect and also offers unique angles and ways to look at it. The mystery aspect of it wasn't really fun for me. It wasn't really predictable, really, but I just didn't really care a whole lot. I don't really remember a whole lot from this movie, but I remember there were some fun moments. I think it was written pretty well. I think it's a lot better than a lot of movies of sort of this coming-of-age teen drama. Yeah, it's hard for me to really have a lot of strong opinions about Love, Simon. It's just sort of sweet and nice and lovely, I guess, but nothing really groundbreaking. Again, this is a great movie for teens. I'd give this one a 6 out of 10. Ready Player One. I guess it had some fun moments, but there really wasn't anything of substance in this movie, and it was just real dumb. It doesn't really stick to any rules that it establishes, and you don't really understand a lot of the rules of this virtual reality universe, and that's really important in these kinds of movies. Like, there's a lot of questions I kept asking myself. This is one of those movies that a lot of people are going to be like, just turn your brain off and enjoy it, but I don't really like doing that, because the whole fun of watching a movie for me includes using my brain. So if I wanted to turn my brain off and watch something, I'd just stay at home and look at the wall. But this movie is so hypocritical, I think is a good word, because I don't know. It's hard to put in words, but it's such on a surface level about fandom, but there's really no substance to it. This movie isn't saying a whole lot, and in the end, and then they set up in the beginning that the real world is so shitty, and then when the main character's life becomes great at the end, he's like, oh, we're gonna turn off this virtual reality world that's better than the real world 2 times a day, because people need to live in the real world. When he described earlier in the movie that the real world is like this shitty nightmare. So that's such a dick thing to do. Like, what about people who are like hospitalized and don't have anything else to do but to go into this virtual world? It's just sort of a selfish and dumb thing to do. And then like there's so many dumb things in this movie, like the fact that all of the main characters just happen to live within like 100 yards of each other. And I don't know. I think this movie is so like derivative and so surface level about fan culture and stuff like that. I can't even decide if it's praising fan culture or looking down upon it. And I also get annoyed by a lot of people who are like, the Iron Giant would never fire his eye laser beams and kill people because the Iron Giant wasn't a weapon. That was the whole point of the movie. And I'm like, well, the point of this movie is that it's not actually the Iron Giant. It's just somebody in the Iron Giant suit. So they can do whatever they want with it. I mean, the main villain is like, I think, a Superman ripoff, and Superman never did any of that. I mean, I know he's not actually Superman, but he might as well have been, and that would have been fine, because these are just avatars. And again, with this movie, and again with movies like this, there's a lot of rules, and you need to know the rules, or it's just gonna come off as dumb. And this movie just comes off as dumb. This is just a dumb popcorn movie, like Transformers, but I guess it's more intelligible, and you know what's going on, so that's a good thing. I can't really think of a whole lot of good things about this movie, although I really enjoyed the Shining sequence. That was really unique and fun, and they even put like a little film grain on that scene to make it match the movie. I would have watched the whole movie where they just jumped through different movies. That would have been fun. I would have really enjoyed that. But overall, this movie, I think, has a lot of problems in the script and in the direction, and it just didn't really do anything for me, really. It could have been so much more, though. But for me, this movie is just kind of a disappointment. But I didn't really expect it to be anything more. And I don't think people will remember this in the same way that they remember other movies in the film itself. So I give this one a 4 out of 10, I guess. Then there's A Quiet Place. And if you know anything about me, you know that I really don't like horror movies. It's not that I don't like being scared. I do. But I think horror movies are the easiest genre to make. That's why you see a lot of directors start in the horror genre. It's easy to scare people. And a lot of horror movies are just lazy and predictable and rely too much on jump scares. Because to me, a movie filled with a lot of jump scares, they're not really scary, they're startling. Anybody can creep up behind you and go boo, but not a lot of people can terrify you to the point where you just feel sick. A Quiet Place doesn't really do that. It doesn't really rely too much on jump scares, but it is above a lot of horror movies that come out. But like Ready Player One, there's a lot of rules with the monster, and the movie sort of ignores some of those rules. Like, yes, the characters seem smart, but once you begin to think about like the things that they could have been doing, the movie sort of falls apart. Like, for instance, if they go by a waterfall, the monsters can't hear them because there's so much noise already that they can talk and they won't really hear them. So I'm thinking, why not just live in an area that is always making noise? There's just a lot of like plot holes like that don't make a lot of sense. And then also, like, there's a lot of visual storytelling in here, which is good, and especially for horror movies. But then there's like a little dry erase board that like explains like how many monsters there are, then it says weakness ? I'm like, nobody would use that. Also, if you can't talk to each other, why not use that dry erase board to communicate with each other? And there's just a lot of plot holes like that. So like Ready Player One, this is a movie that gets worse the more you think about it. And I think it's important to think about movies critically, because that's where I find joy, at least, is analyzing movies. And if movies can endure that pressure of being criticized and still be great, then that's when you know you got a really great movie. But I think this movie is a fun ride, but I don't think it's too much more. It's directed really well by John Krasinski. He does a great job, and this movie looks great. The design of the monsters is a little standard, but it's got a few unique design elements to it that are really nice. The kids are really good actors, which is rare. It was a fun time, but I think this movie really depended on who you saw this movie with. And if you got people that were talking in the theater, they probably ruined this movie for you. Fortunately, my screening was relatively quiet, which is actually kind of rare for me. But this is the kind of movie that you don't want to eat any popcorn during, because it uses sound really well, which I think is a unique hook. And I think if they worked a little bit more on the rules of this monster and the script a little bit, it could have been a lot better. And I think it could have used some more restraint in editing. There's a scene where Emily Blunt is trying to give birth really quietly, but it keeps cutting back to like the secondary story, which adds tension, I guess. But it would have been so much more terrifying if the camera would have just stayed on Emily Blunt that whole time instead of cutting back and forth. because you sort of lose that momentum. So there's just a lot of little things like that would have made the movie a lot better. But as it is, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's a lot better than a lot of horror movies we get nowadays. So we should be thankful that there's a movie that treats the audience with a bit more respect and doesn't dumb down to them so much. So I'll give this one a 6 out of 10, which is pretty high for a horror movie for me. Then we got Too Funny to Fail, a documentary about the Dana Carvey show, and I believe the 90s? If you don't know anything about the Dana Carvey show, it was sort of a variety sketch show that Dana Carvey had, and it lasted very short. It was very ahead of its time. It was raunchy. It made fun of politicians more than SNL was at the time. And if they would have waited maybe 10 years, this show would have really taken off. But it was just at a bad time slot, and it was just too ahead of its time, and it got canceled. But there's a really interesting story behind it. Like, for instance, the first sketch is Dana Carvey playing Bill Clinton milking, I forgot what it was, puppies or something like that. And he's literally got like 6 nipples hanging out of him. And like the censors were like, we're not having this. Yeah, but the story is really interesting. This is where Steve Carell and Stephen Colbert got their start, and Louis C.K. as well. So there was a lot of talent behind this show. And this is just sort of like a Talking Heads documentary, very standard. It doesn't really do anything unique filmmaking-wise, but it's a good story. Unfortunately, I did know a lot about this story beforehand. I didn't really walk away from this movie knowing anything new. So for me personally, I didn't get a whole lot out of it, other than getting to watch these people who were involved with the show sort of reminisce about it. So it's an interesting story, and I recommend checking it out if you like late night television, like SNL. I believe it's on Hulu. But again, like I said, it doesn't really do anything unique filmmaking-wise. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to give this one a 7 out of 10. It's a good story, but doesn't really do anything unique. And then we have Blockers, or Cock Blockers, if you want to call it that. A movie about 3 parents who are trying to prevent their kids from having sex on prom night. And it sounds kind of dumb, but there's some interesting motivations behind each of the parents. Again, this is a studio comedy. It relies a little bit more on improv, but I liked it. It wasn't shot as well as Game Night, but it definitely stands above a lot of studio comedies that have been coming out lately. Like I said, each parent has a unique perspective on the way they treat the virginity of their daughters, and it doesn't treat women like objects. It's not dumb. And the girls who play the daughters aren't like sluts or anything like that. They all have unique personalities, and they all have unique reasons for why they want to lose their virginity. But it seems like one of those like late night comedies from the 90s or something like that, and that's not really what it is. There's a lot more character here. There's a lot more emotion here. It does have a lot of dumb scenes, though. Like a scene where John Cena is like butt chugging a keg for no reason. So there's a lot of just dumb studio comedy crap in there like that. But it does have some interesting character stuff. But if I heard that this was somebody's favorite comedy of this year, I would respect that, because it's pretty good. It's above average for a studio comedy. And I was surprised by that. And I was surprised to find John Cena so fun to watch, because I get so tired of professional athletes trying to work their way into comedy. It doesn't always work for me. But John Cena is, he's a fun guy to watch. And his muscles weren't too distracting. They have like one throwaway line of like why he's so big, but he kind of sticks out like a sore thumb. But this movie's decent. And it's not dumb, which is a big plus for studio comedies for me. So I'll give this one a 6 out of 10 too. I'm giving a lot of 6 out of 10s here. Then we have Isle of Dogs. Wes Anderson can be very divisive for a lot of people. He has a very unique style that doesn't work for everybody, and I get that, but I personally love it when a director has a unique stamp. And Wes Anderson definitely has that. You could look at pretty much any frame from any of his movies, and you can tell it's a Wes Anderson movie, and Isle of Dogs is no different. Basically, if you like Wes Anderson, you're going to love Isle of Dogs. And if you don't, you might not like it and you might not get it because the dialogue is very stilted. It's got a very unique style, but it's just gorgeous to me. And I love stop motion, and the style of stop motion here is pretty unique, and I really, really enjoyed it. Every frame of this movie is handcrafted and just beautiful to look at. It's got a really interesting and unique story too. There were some things I didn't see coming, but unfortunately, among all the other Wes Anderson movies, this one was kind of forgettable to me. I don't remember a whole lot except for a few scenes. But it does have a terrific cast, and I had a good time watching it. And there's a lot of influences from Japanese culture, which is fun. And I love dogs, too. So I enjoyed watching the dogs. And I also enjoyed later on that I found out that Isle of Dogs sounds like I Love Dogs. So that was kind of a fun thing to figure out. But this movie isn't too complicated, really, to figure out if you like. Basically, if you like Wes Anderson, you're going to like it. But as it compares to Fantastic Mr. Fox, I don't think it holds a candle at all. Fantastic Mr. Fox is one of my favorite movies ever, and the stop-motion art style works perfectly for that. And here it does too, but not nearly as much. I think that partly has to do with just a lot of human characters, and I think it's harder to pull off humans in stop-motion form. But the amount of work that was put into this movie is just amazing, especially if you do a little bit of research on it. And the intent of a filmmaker and the amount of effort they put into it is a big factor in what I consider a movie great. And there was clearly a lot of love and passion and hard work put behind this. So I'm giving this one an 8 out of 10. I really enjoyed it quite a bit, but it didn't quite live up to what I really wanted it to be. Then there's The Death of Stalin. This is one of those movies that I consider to be great, but I do not like at all. This is going to be a hard one for me because either a lot of the jokes went over my head or it just wasn't funny. This is from the makers of In the Loop. It's a political satire set in Russia, and all the characters have American accents, and that's kind of the point. That's sort of like a meta joke. Like, they don't go out of the... Like, Steve Buscemi is in the movie, and he doesn't even put on a Russian accent at all, even though he's playing, like, this Russian official. But it's just about the aftermath of Stalin and how his compatriots, or whatever you want to call them, are affected by it. I did not pay attention in history class growing up, and I don't know anything about this era of Russian history, so a lot of the jokes probably went over my head, and I found it boring and not funny at all, but that's probably only because I didn't pay attention in history class. If you know a lot about history, I don't even know what year this movie takes place. This is how much I don't know. I don't even know what war or anything. I'm real dumb when it comes to history. So there's a few of my friends that I know who are really into history and stuff like that that'll probably get a hell of a lot more out of this movie than I did. But for me, it just didn't work. I don't know what to say. It was pretty. It was shot well. The pacing was a little slow for me, but I think that was kind of the point. I really don't know what to rate this. Personally, I'd give it a 4 out of 10, but that's probably not accurate. It's probably more like a 7, but I don't know. I'm not the demographic for this movie, but it was interesting, I guess, maybe. I really liked that they had American accents. That was kind of fun. There were a few sequences that I chuckled at, but like I said, most of the jokes went over my head, so this just was not my kind of movie. But I can sense there's a lot of potential for greatness here. I just don't know where it is. Now, Avengers Infinity War. Obviously, a lot of people love this movie, and it is a fun time. But I'm not sure if this is even a movie. And I know that is a bit hyperbolic, but I guess what I mean is this movie is very dependent on you knowing about all of the other Marvel movies. So it feels more like an episode of a TV show than a movie. There aren't really any character arcs. There aren't a whole lot of setups and payoffs. It's just like a series of things happening. They're fun things to watch happening, but there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of like actual like plot stuff happening. There's a lot of things that are set up early on that aren't paid off, but you could argue are going to be paid off in the next movie. But I always try to look at movies as individual pieces of work, and right now I'm not sure if that I should be doing that or not, because these Marvel movies are, I think, turning into something new, kind of like comic books, where you have to know about all the other comic books beforehand to really understand it. And I don't really agree with that for movies, but maybe I'm wrong. I'm not sure. I enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun with it. I would have hated this movie if Thanos wasn't an interesting character, but he was basically the protagonist here, and I really loved that choice. And you understand where he's coming from, and he's an interesting character. There's a lot of fun set pieces in here. They really show DC how to do a movie with a lot of characters, because like the fight sequences are so much better than anything DC has put out lately. And I'm not a Marvel fanboy, but they're just better shot and better choreographed and use the powers so much better, and the characters are so much more interesting. It's a fun time, but I'm not really sure how to rate it, because again, I don't really feel like this is a movie. It really didn't satisfy a lot of itches I have when I go see a movie. And of course, all the deaths at the end don't really mean anything, because you know they're all going to come back. And it would be such a cop-out if they did bring them all back, because that would, for me, mean that this whole movie was pointless. I liked that Thanos won in the end, but I know it's not going to stick. I know they're not going to get rid of Black Panther, so like I think it was kind of dumb for them to have him be one of the first people that died, because like immediately I was like, oh, this doesn't matter. And then the last death is, I think, Spider-Man, and that's like the most emotional one. But at that point, I was like, oh, all these characters are going to come back anyways, so I don't really care about this scene. If Spider-Man was the first one to die, that would have, I think, been a much better choice, because it was more emotional, and you didn't know how many more were going to die. So, I don't know. I try to look at this movie as its own thing, and as its own thing, I'd probably give it like a 4 out of 10, because there just wasn't really a story, really, and the story that was there wasn't really something substantial. But as a Marvel movie, as part of a series, I'd give this like a 9 out of 10. So this is a complicated movie for me, because I'm not sure how to feel about it, and I'm not sure if the way I'm looking at it is right or not, because we're stepping into new grounds here. This is new territory. I did follow the Marvel formula quite a bit, but it's a fun formula. There's a reason why these movies do so well. So I'm just glad that they took some risks, but if the risks aren't going to stick, it's hard to feel any of the emotion, especially at the end. But if I'm looking at the movie as it is, I have to imagine that all these characters aren't going to come back. So in that way, it's good, but it's hard to disassociate this movie with what's going to be coming up next. So it's complicated. Then we have a much different kind of movie called Tully, the spiritual sequel to Juno and Young Adult, directed by Jason Reitman and written by Diablo Cody. This movie is about a woman who just gave birth and is experiencing pretty extreme postpartum depression. So she hires a night nurse to take care of her baby while she tries to get some sleep. And this movie is right in line with Juno and Young Adult as great character-driven dramas. And this movie says a lot of really powerful things about motherhood and stress and depression. And it really struck a chord with me. And there's not a whole lot I can say about this movie without spoiling it. But it's, I think, really great. And I think there's a lot of people out there who misinterpret this movie as sort of condemning postpartum depression or something. I've read some articles where they're like, this movie's offensive, but I've also read articles where people are like, this movie is so true to life and so puts a spotlight on postpartum depression that no other movie really has ever done, and it's really significant for that. So it's going to affect people in different ways, but it really worked for me. I've never seen pregnancy depicted quite in the way it is here, not even in Juno. And it really makes me appreciate how much work my mom has put into raising me, because it seems like a real nightmare. Also, this movie is very smart, and it doesn't do a lot of dumb or cliche things. Like, the father is sort of inattentive, but they never get like in an argument. You know, they genuinely love each other. It's not like he's a deadbeat dad or something. It's just he doesn't understand what she's going through. So it's not black and white like it very easily could have been. But this movie does some really unique things that will stick with me. And it's a great movie for moms. And I don't mean that as in a bad way. Sometimes I do mean that in a bad way, but not here. Like the movie Book Club. But this movie will affect moms very greatly. I don't have kids, but I've heard from a lot of people who have kids that this movie will affect you very, very much in a good way. So check it out. If you like Juno or are young adult, it's very much a similar tone. It's shot well, it's written beautifully, and it gives a unique perspective. I give this one a 7 out of 10, I guess. Super Troopers 2. I think this is the kind of studio comedy I was talking about earlier that I can't stand. I'm going to be honest, I wasn't a fan of the first Super Troopers. I know a lot of people, especially my age, are a huge fan of Super Troopers. But to me, that movie is just crass for the sake of being crass, obnoxious for the sake of being obnoxious. It doesn't really have any substance that I look for in comedies. Of course, I do like Dumb and Dumber, which is, you could argue, dumb for the sake of being dumb. But I enjoy those characters, and there's a lot of fun set pieces, but I just don't feel the same way about Super Troopers. I imagine if you're high off your ass, you could probably get some laughs out of it. And Super Troopers 2, I think, just leans on that tone, and I can't stand it. There's just way too much improvisation. The characters are unlikable. And I like a lot of movies with unlikable characters here, but I think they're supposed to be likable. And to me, they're just irritating and not fun to watch. Super Troopers 2 is incredibly forgettable. I can't remember a single joke from the entire movie. I think I maybe chuckled once, and I don't even remember what it was. This movie is so stupid, and not in a good way, and relies way too much on improvisation. And I love improvisation, and it works in some movies, but when it's the only thing you rely on, it just becomes dull and uninteresting. And this movie was just so boring to me because I just thought it was so dumb and lazy and predictable and most importantly unmemorable. I think that's the worst offense for a comedy, is for something to be unmemorable. I imagine if you like Super Troopers 1, you'll like this one. I've heard that a lot of people say it's not as good, but to me it's just leaning on the things that the first one was, so I don't see why they don't think it's better just because it's more of the same. But it just wasn't for me. The comedy wasn't smart or interesting. And yeah, I give this one a 3 out of 10. It just was not funny to me or interesting, and just seemed like a cash grab. Deadpool 2 was a superhero movie and a studio comedy. So there's a lot of baggage that comes with that, which means it's going to be hard to impress me. And I liked Deadpool 1, although it did become a bit repetitive towards the end. But Deadpool 2 is fun. It's a real fun and funny movie, and I liked it quite a bit. The only thing I really don't like about it is that it makes fun of a lot of tropes and cliches in superhero movies, which I really loved. But then the movie itself is dumb and cliche. Like, the things that are supposed to be genuine in this movie are as dumb as the things that they're making fun of. So I think there could have been a lot more to be done there, story-wise, just because the stuff that is treated seriously is also dumb and cliche. But I liked a lot of the jokes. I laughed quite a bit, and it was fun. It's exactly what you want a Deadpool movie to be, though I think it could have been a bit more. I really liked how it opened, but there was just a lot of, all the stuff that was supposed to be genuine was real dumb to me, which is a shame. Also, there were a few jokes that just went on way too long, like the scene where has baby legs. It could have been like an 8-second joke and it would have been fine, but it goes on for like 2 minutes, and they just keep improvising the same joke over and over again, and I'm like, move on. And it does the same thing at the end when Deadpool's dying, but I guess that was the point for it to be long, but it just went on for too long for me. I really enjoyed Juggernaut. He was a great addition. And I really enjoyed all the side characters that they teased in the trailer, but then they weren't in there at all, basically. That was real fun. And with Cable, I think he was interesting, but they could have really leaned into the straight man-ness of him, I think. One of the first Deadpool 2 trailers was him playing as like Woody and Buzz Lightyear, but it was like Deadpool and Cable. And I thought they were teasing that it was going to follow a similar story structure where Deadpool knows he's a superhero character and Cable doesn't, and Deadpool's trying to convince him that he's a fictional character, and Cable's like, I don't know what you're talking about, I'm real. That would have been really fun. I would have really, really enjoyed that. So basically, this movie took some jabs that were really great, but I think it could have been a lot more ballsy. When this film was first announced on IMDb, it said Untitled Deadpool sequel. And I think it would have been really fun and interesting if they would have kept that as the actual title. That's the kind of really silly stuff I want to see. So I think they just need to lean into that a little bit more, and it could be so much more. But as it is, it's a pretty standard and pretty fun superhero movie with some jabs at Marvel and DC alike. So I'd give this one a 6 out of 10 again. I don't know why I'm giving so many 6 out of 10s. There are so many movies this year that are just barely above moderate, just barely above mediocre. Speaking of mediocre, Solo, a Star Wars story. Man, is this movie divisive again. Feels like every Marvel movie, or especially every Star Wars movie, is super divisive these days. And there was so much crap happening behind the scenes of Solo, a Star Wars story, that it just comes off as a complete mess. I mean, this is the most expensive Star Wars movie ever made just because they had to reshoot like 90% of the movie or whatever it was. And I'm a huge fan of Lord and Miller. They did a terrific job with the Lego movie and the Jump Street movies, and I'm so disappointed that they fired them. I mean, maybe the movie wouldn't have been good with them, but at least it would have been unique and interesting. Ron Howard is a fine director, but he doesn't really have any style or anything. And it's the cinematography most of the time is just so ugly and brown and dark. I don't have a lot of problems with as like a fanboy of Star Wars, although I will say that they really did a bad job at characterizing Han Solo. Like in Star Wars The Last Jedi, a lot of people are angry that Luke Skywalker doesn't have like the same character that he did before, and I'm fine with that really, because this is like, I don't know, however many years in the future, and there's a lot of things that could have happened to Luke to make him doubt the Force and stuff, and there's always been a sense of darkness with Luke, so I bought that. But with Solo, a Star Wars story, you're going back in time, so changing the character is hugely important. And when we first meet Han Solo in A New Hope, he's like a selfish asshole who's just in it for the money. He doesn't know anything about the Force. He's like a trucker, And in this movie, it's like, oh, he was a good guy all along. He's always been a good guy, like in the Star Wars movies you like. But I would have loved this movie so much more if he started out as like a good, kind-hearted, go-lucky guy, and then something horrific happens to him, where he ends up being cynical and like an asshole and just in it for the money. And by the end of it, he turns into the guy that we meet at the beginning of episode 4. That would have been so much more ballsy. Disney would never do that. But that's what the character is, And I feel like they completely ignored that. I mean, Alden Ehrenreich, or however you pronounce his name, did a fine job as portraying Han Solo. You're never going to win exactly trying to do a character that's that big, but he did fine for what it was. But the character, I think, was just totally ignored, and that really bothered me. And also, this movie is just very standard. There's like every cliche in the book in this movie with like backstabbings and stuff. I saw like every single twist coming. And like even the fan pandering is done poorly. Like you're by yourself, I'm gonna call you Solo. That's like one of the dumbest things I've ever seen in a movie ever. And then like they try to do this fan service thing where Han shoots first, but they cut away so you don't see him actually shooting. So it makes it like G-rated, but like that takes away the punch of him shooting that guy. And then he rushes over and like consoles him, and holds him in his arms and stuff. And I'm like, Han Solo, just shoot and walk away. That's Han Solo. And it just feels very half-baked and bland. And I think that's sometimes worse than a bad movie. I think Solo doesn't take as many risks as it needed to. I think the one thing I really enjoyed about this movie is the Han and Chewie stuff. Their chemistry was great. A lot better than Han Solo and whatever her name is, Kira. They had like no chemistry at all. But this movie is just very middle of the line. I'm so glad that Disney has decided to put on hold a lot of these spin-off movies, because we're starting to get, or at least I am, starting to get a lot of Star Wars fatigue. And if they take more time in between these movies, they'll have more time to develop a really great script, fire as many directors as they want, and actually make a good movie. I'd rather get a great Star Wars movie every 2 years than a bland and mediocre one like twice a year. Some people would like to see a Star Wars movie every week, but the quality is just not going to be there. It's simple quantity versus quality, and I'd rather see quality. So I'm willing to wait. And I love Star Wars, but I don't like Star Wars because of lightsabers and X-wings and stuff like that. I like it because it's at least the original film is a well-crafted story. It's shot well. The script is perfect, and it's a unique story, and it's done well. If that stuff wasn't there, I probably wouldn't be a Star Wars fan. I'm not there to see people fighting with lightsabers. I don't give a shit about that. I want to see interesting characters. I want to see an interesting story, and I want to see them capture the tone that Star Wars originally was. Say what you will about The Force Awakens, I think it captured that tone pretty well, and it just wasn't there with Solo. So I'm giving this one a 4 out of 10. It was very disappointing for me. It could have been so much more, but Disney totally squandered this. Then we have Action Point, a Johnny Knoxville movie with a lot of real stunts like the Jackass movies, but in a narrative form, which I think is interesting. The Jackass movies have always been guilty pleasures for me. I know they're garbage. I know they're not really real movies, but I get a kick out of idiots doing stupid shit. And that's what those movies are, and they're just fun for me. And I think Action Point is an interesting experiment to combine a narrative with dumb stunts. And the story really isn't anything unique. We've seen it a million times before, where a small business is trying to do something, but the big corporations want to shut them down. Very standard stuff. Deadbeat dad who's trying to win the affection of his daughter, But the stunts are fun. It's a fun framing device for the stunts. I would have much rather just seen Johnny Knoxville do stupid shit at a theme park for an hour and a half. I would have enjoyed that more. But I think it was worth the price of admission to see this sort of weird experiment. But I think the problem is because we see so much fake stunts in narrative films, it's sort of hard to feel the impact of these stunts because you're so conditioned to thinking that they're fake. And in like Jackass, they're real because there's no story around them. It's just stunts for the sake of stunts. And if that's what Action Point was, I think it would have been much more entertaining. I think it could work better in the future if they actually focused on the story a bit more. But as it is, I think it's just kind of squandered. So as a guilty pleasure, I give it like a 5, or a 4. But as an overall film, I guess I'd also give it a 4. It's kind of fun. It's real dumb. But that's sort of the point. So yeah, 4 out of 10, I guess. Then there's possibly the most controversial movie of the year, which is Hereditary, which infamously got a D-, I think, on CinemaScore and like a 96% on Rotten Tomatoes. And people are saying that like critics are elitists and they don't represent what people actually think of movies. And I don't think that's right at all. CinemaScore is basically reflection on people's expectations, not necessarily what they thought of the film itself. If people were going into this movie knowing that it was a slow, cerebral horror movie, not filled with dumb jump scares, but like it's more traumatizing than it is scary. If people knew that's what it was, I think it would have a higher CinemaScore. But I think people who went into this were expecting those dumb horror movies that we get so often, and they ended up being bored because they just didn't know how to process what they were seeing. because this is very much in the line of Rosemary's Baby or The Shining or The Exorcist, where it's a character-driven drama at first, and then it slowly ramps up and gets real crazy towards the end. And I loved this movie. It's shot so well. The writing is amazing, and it's acted terrifically. I think it's Toni Collette. I think she should get an Oscar for this movie. She's asked to do so many crazy and extreme things in this movie, and she pulls it off so well. This is a movie that is going to be really fun to watch a second time around. There's really two kinds of horror movies. There's like jump scare horror movies that are just startling, and then there's these kinds of movies which are just unsettling and hard to watch, and I loved it for that. There's so much detail put into every frame of this movie, and the things that are scary are just there's like slow camera shots that and like the problem with jump scares for me is that they're cheap and they don't last long. When you're startled and there's a jump scare, that fear that you feel is a release. And with these kinds of movies that are just full of dread, you don't get that release. They just put you in a horrifying place and they keep you there. And some people respond to that poorly, and some people get it. In a filmmaking aspect, this movie is done so well. This is one of my favorite movies of the year, and that's very rare for a horror movie to be that high up on my list here. I'd give Hereditary a 9 out of 10. This movie is really something, but again, it's very divisive. It might not be for you, but if it is, you are going to love it. Like Ghostbusters, this is one of those all-female recasted remakes, and I have a lot of opinions about that. But I try to not put politics into my reviews, but if a movie is leaning this much on that gimmick, it's hard not to think about. So I'm just going to try to get that out of the way real quick. I think it's great that more movies are being led by women these days. That's terrific, and I love that. But when you're just remaking movies with female-led characters, I think that's sort of a cop-out. And by that I mean filmmakers aren't confident enough to have females like lead an original film, which is why I like Annihilation so much. They have to tag them onto things that they know are already successful so they can guarantee like good revenue. And I think that's just lazy. And that's how I felt a lot of the time during Ocean's 8, is that a lot of it's just kind of lazy. And the tone of this movie, I think, tries to match Ocean's 11, but it does it so poorly. There's a lot of weird editing decisions here, and the pacing is all off, and it feels weird. It feels awkward a lot of the time. And the heist itself isn't really too interesting. It's an all-women cast, and they're stealing jewelry and diamonds. I mean, I think there could have been a lot more done there. The characters aren't really too interesting. Yeah, they all have unique personalities, but we don't really get to know them that well, aside from, oh, my brother is Danny Ocean. And the heist is at least interesting a little bit. You know what's happening. It could have really used one of those montage scenes where they go over what's going to happen. Usually that's not fun, but in heist movies, it adds a lot of tension, I think. And there's just a lot of weird like script writing choices and weird editing choices that just didn't mesh well for me. And like towards the end, like after the heist, there's like they spend like 10 minutes going over where and how they spent their money, and I'm like, I don't give a shit what they did with their money. Why does that how does that affect this story at all? I was looking at my watch waiting for this movie to be done, and that just could have been completely cut out because I just don't care. And maybe I would have cared if these characters were more developed, but they're just not. And I'm not a big fan of when there's like twists in the movie where there weren't any hints of it really, and that kind of happens here. Like there's some like add-ons to like the things they did in the heist, and I was like, oh, interesting. I wish you would have hinted that towards us so we could figure it out on our own. You know, it's not really interesting if they just go, oh, and by the way, we did this. Oh, okay, whatever. You know, so it's just kind of bland and doesn't really take a whole lot of risks, and it's just unmemorable. Again, unmemorable. I don't know, I didn't have a whole lot of fun with it. Yeah, it's just kind of bland and boring. I'm glad movies are doing well with all females, but I just wish they would just do original stories, you know. And I'm not even a big fan of the original Ocean's 11. I'm not like, oh, you shouldn't do this to this property, you know? I don't really care about that. It's just kind of lazy to just take women onto an existing property, you know? Just make interesting original stories and cast women in it. You know, I think diversity is great, but I don't think it should be necessary. Otherwise, movies start to look like a college brochure where every person is a different race, and it just feels pandering. And that's what this movie feels like. I'll give it a 4 out of 10, I guess. Then we have Incredibles 2. Incredibles 1 is great. One of the great superhero movies we have. And Incredibles 2 is fun, but it doesn't hold a candle to what the first one was. The first one, Incredibles 1, took a lot of risks, actually. Like, people die. Mr. Fantastic threatens to kill an innocent person, you know? And that's interesting. And kids can handle that, you know? But there's nothing really like that in Incredibles 2. A lot of it feels lazy. Like, these movies are set in the 60s, you know? Like it really should have taken place like 20 years after the original and not right afterwards, because there's a lot of things that feel like it should have been taking place 20 years later. Like, one of the subplots is that the main villain is pointing out that, you know, people are always on their screens. Nobody pays attention to the real world. You know, they're slaves to their screens. And I'm like, it's the 1960s, you know? We're not there yet. So it doesn't really feel like a 60s movie. And all of the actors have aged, so, like, almost 20 years, so, or 10 years, however long it was. The actors have aged, so it doesn't really fit. So I feel like the only reason why they said it right afterwards is so that they can capitalize on Jack Jack, which I found so irritating. And I know it's a kid's movie, and it's supposed to be fun, and Jack Jack is cute and whatever, but there's no substance to him at all. It's just cute for the sake of being cute. There was a person in front of me at the theater who was constantly on their phone, and they put away their phone whenever Jack Jack was on screen and, like, applauded whenever he did something. And that's the kind of patience that a lot of people have in the theater these days. You know, there's just no reason for him to be in this movie at all. He doesn't really serve a purpose. And again, it feels like the only reason that they said this right after the first one is so that they can have cute little baby Jack Jack. And I just find that so incredibly lazy. Also, the motivation for the main villain doesn't make any sense at all. Like, they don't want superheroes because they don't want people to rely on them, you know, because it makes people weak. And I'm like, well, couldn't you say the same thing about police, you know? Shouldn't you be after the police or whatever? And why is the main villain helping superheroes come back just to make them go away? There's so many problems with the villain here, and there's so many characters that are just dumb and make logical steps that don't make any sense. But I will say that obviously the animation is fantastic, and the set pieces are really fun. The action's great. There's a great use of this motorcycle. She stretches and it separates, and that's really fun and unique, and I've never seen that before. And they use their powers really well. But there's just a lot of dumb pandering crap in this movie, and it's not as thought-provoking as the first one was. So I was disappointed by that. So I'll give this one a 5 out of 10, I guess. It's a good kids movie. It's a good family movie. It's about important things. But there's just a lot of dumb pandering crap in it that just didn't need to be there, and that the original one just didn't have at all. And then we have Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, which is more dumb crap. I wasn't a big fan of Jurassic World, the first one, or the other two Jurassic Park sequels. The reason why that first Jurassic Park is so great isn't because it's dinosaurs, or because it's dinosaurs fighting dinosaurs, or because the Velociraptor is cool. It's because the characters are unique and interesting. And like, none of them really want the dinosaurs to be there. They all know it's a bad idea, you know? And you're rooting for the characters and stuff. And none of the other movies really have that. And especially these Jurassic World movies, you don't really care about the characters, or at least I don't. And their motivations are weak and bland. And this movie is so cliche and dumb. There's so much dumb crap, and the movie somehow looks ugly and good at the same time. Like, the special effects are pleasing to look at, but they don't mesh well with the real characters. Like, I was never convinced that there was an actual dinosaur in front of them, even when there was animatronics, which I really love. But it has like that stereotype where you're introduced to this guy who's like lovable and nice, and then he turns on a dime to an evil villain, and then there's an introduction of a clone girl, which there's no reason for her to be a clone at all, except she's like, those dinosaurs are clones like me, so I'm gonna let them free. That's just poor and cheap and lazy motivation, and it doesn't really even make sense. I mean, there's prisoners in prisons that have done horrible things, and they're alive like me. Does that mean I want to let them go? No. And it's objectively a bad idea to let those dinosaurs loose in the world. And then the movie ends on like this weird optimistic note to like, look at the majesty of these dinosaurs released into the world, you know? They're one with us now. I'm like, this should be a travesty, you know? The tone is completely wrong here. Bad crap is going to happen. And I feel like this movie was made for the sole purpose of putting dinosaurs into the world so that they can have an actual Jurassic World for the third movie. And it just seems like a transition between the first one and the eventual third one. And in general, there's just a lot of dumb crap in this movie. And another one, for instance, is they're having an auction to sell off these dinosaurs. And the reason why they're selling them is dumb. It's like they want to make them weapons, and they're like, this dinosaur is basically a living tank and can do anything a tank can do. And I'm like, well, can you put people inside of it? Is it completely indestructible? Can it shoot bullets? You know? Instead, it's an animal. It's so dumb. And then they sell them for like $2 million or something. I'm like, that's it? I think the combined cost of all of the dinosaurs is less than the cost of the movie itself. I'm like, why are these dinosaurs so cheap? They should be like billions of dollars. Anyways, much like Solo, a Star Wars story, Jurassic World seems to just have like a surface level appreciation for the movie that made that franchise so good. And it's just dumb and lazy. It feels like an 8th grader wrote it. So I give this one, I don't know, a 3 out of 10. It's real dumb and stupid, and not in the good way.